Welcome, friends. Today, I'd like to discuss something that I think we've all noticed trending in modern media, particularly in anything from larger studios that tend to try and play it as safe as possible while also being as lazy as possible. Instead of movies and shows that tell a story because it's a story the writers want to tell, everything feels like it needs to be making a statement. It needs to be sending a message. Don't get me wrong, older media had messages too, but they tended to be more simple and have a wider application. Things like being kind, not judging others for their looks, being a good person will get you further in life than greed, things like that. Now, now, if your movie or show doesn't have a checklist of ideological messages being beaten in with a hammer every 5 seconds, it's just not good enough. Or at least that's what the people who have been making them seem to think. However, with the increasing losses that many companies are taking because of these works, hopefully they'll start getting the idea that people like watching movies to have a fun time and enjoy themselves, not to be lectured through hideous CGI and auto tuned pop garbage with lyrics that mean absolutely nothing if you actually look at them, especially when said lectures are being delivered by self righteous brats who openly insult the source material and everyone who actually liked it, aka the people who would be interested in maybe actually seeing the new version. Snow White is a classic story that has many versions told by countless people. My personal favorite is Boar and Apples, a retelling by my favorite author and artist, Ursula Vernon, a fellow gardening and birdwatching enthusiast who also writes under the pen name T. Kingfisher. They all have many variations, but at the core of the story, it tends to be pretty simple. A young woman with skin so fair she's named after it is born into a beautiful kingdom. Her birth mother usually dies, though in some versions the Wicked Queen is her birth mother and not just her stepmother. But either way, there is a queen who is beautiful but also incredibly jealous and cruel. Snow White's father either dies or ends up leaving for one reason or another, and Snow White is treated like a servant, ignored, and has to work hard. As she grows up, she becomes a beautiful young woman, and the queen can't have that, demanding to be the most beautiful in the land and not tolerating anyone else being more attractive than her. When the day comes that the magic mirror tells her that Snow's beauty has surpassed her own, rage and jealousy leads her to demand that the huntsman takes Snow out to the forest and kills her and brings back her heart. In some versions, it's more than that. In what was probably the most odious version I've ever read, even considering the time period it was written in, the queen demanded her heart and tongue. In this version, Snow and the huntsman were accompanied out to the woods by Snow's three closest companions: a monkey, her dog, and a black slave girl. The huntsman tells them what's going on and that he has to take a heart and tongue back to the queen or she'll hunt Snow down herself and make sure she's dead. And she'd have the huntsman killed as well for not following orders. Snow's three companions start arguing among themselves over which of the three of them should have the honor of dying in Snow's place. Which, of course, Snow doesn't want any of them to do, but this mostly comes in the form of her bemoaning her bad luck in a way that maybe at the time was supposed to come across as delicate and selfless, but now is just horribly self centered. During the argument, the monkey runs up a tree and throws herself down from a high branch, dying when she hits the ground. Unfortunately, her tongue and heart are too small. Snow whines about her bad fortune at losing a friend and being no better off for it. The slave girl and the dog continue arguing until the slave girl takes the knife from the huntsman and cuts her own throat. But unfortunately, and this is the point where you gotta sigh and remember that this was from a different time period, her tongue and heart, when they cut them out, are pitch black and wouldn't work at all. I don't know if the author had never actually met a black person or was just that steeped in racial prejudices, if it was a common literary thing at the time, but ugh. Snow, once again, bemoans her misfortune and cries about losing friends and not being better off for it, rather than curling up in a corner screaming at seeing two of her best friends off themselves in horrible ways right in front of her. The dog, being oddly smug and rude about it, points out that if she'd only let him have the honor, she would have only him to mourn. So the huntsman kills the dog and takes the dog's tongue and heart, which, a dog's tongue doesn't really look much like a human's, and depending on the breed, the heart could be a different size entirely, too. But I suppose Queens probably didn't spend much time in the butcher shop, so maybe she wouldn't notice. Snow takes the time after the huntsman takes the dog's heart and tongue away to bury her friends and carve an epitaph into the tree, which seems like an incredibly stupid idea. They're not far from the castle at that point, and leaving a note carved into the tree all about how you tricked the queen? That's kind of a really stupid thing to do. That version definitely showed its age, and that particular scene was really out there compared to other versions, but it mostly followed the traditional story threads after that. In any case, in pretty much every version, the huntsman returns with a heart that isn't Snow's to trick the queen, and Snow runs off into the woods where she meets the dwarves or the fairies or whatever magical creature she ends up staying with afterwards. She usually repays them for letting her stay with them by doing things like cooking and cleaning and basic household duties. The Wicked Queen, who is usually also a witch, is satisfied with the fake heart for some time until she asks the mirror again who is the fairest and finds out that Snow is still alive. In many stories, she makes several attempts on Snow's life with different devices. Things like magic lace to strangle her, a poison comb, or sweets, with Snow being saved every time. The apple is always the final attack, and the one that seems to actually work, with her being gently tended to by those around her and put on display. Some stories keep it more like the Disney version, where it was a kiss from the prince that woke her. Other versions have the apple piece falling from her mouth in various ways, and that's what wakes her up. Probably the creepiest version I've ever heard was the one which I think is actually the same as the one I mentioned before, where the prince took her body home with him and introduced a dead body to his mother, the Dowager Queen, as his bride. The queen, understandably, tried to dissuade him from this, but he refused, and from how his mother and her servants act, he's unhinged enough that they're afraid he'd have them all killed, including his own mother, if they don't do what he says. He ends up leaving for some time and instructs his mother and her servants to look after his corpse bride while he's gone. Understandably, they don't want to go near it, and basically leave her in a glass coffin and refer to her as the doll. Possibly the mother's way of trying to cope with the fact that her son has clearly lost his mind, and she'd rather believe he's in one of those "this dude married his anime body pillow" type situations rather than, "oh god, my son just dragged home this random girl's corpse and is keeping it, what is he doing to it? I do not want to think about this." Part of me thinks that she was hoping he'd die off on whatever quest he'd gone on and she could pass the kingdom down to one of his less creepy cousins or something. Unfortunately, they do eventually get word that he's headed home, and everyone panics. They haven't gone anywhere near the doll in that entire time, not even wanting to be in the same room as her. By now, she's gotten dusty and musty and has fly dirt on her because, ew. They try to clean her up, but while they're trying to wash the dust off her face and hands, water drips onto her dress and spots it. The servants start panicking, knowing that if the prince finds out that they didn't take good care of his doll, he'd have them executed. The queen quickly orders a dress just like the one she's wearing to be made, so they can switch them out, and hopefully he'll be none the wiser. While they're taking the old dress off, she's jostled around a bit and the piece of apple falls out of her mouth and she wakes up. At first, everyone is freaked out. But eventually they calm down and the queen tries to take the situation in hand. For some reason, she decides that the best thing to do is to hide Snow away and try to tell her son that they had to get rid of the doll because of the smell. Why exactly she decided to do this, I'm not sure, but she did seem like a decent sort with how protective she was of her servants, so maybe she figured that her creep of a son wasn't likely to be the kind of person this traumatized, confused girl should be stuck with and was trying to spare her. The prince got home and immediately demanded to see his doll. The queen told him that they tried their best to care for the doll, but it smelled so horribly that they'd had to bury it. The prince became enraged and demanded that the servants be put to death immediately. The queen tried to calm him down, but nothing would change his mind. So eventually, to save the lives of her servants, she had them bring Snow out. Seeing her as a living, talking being didn't seem to bother the prince at all, and they got married and happily ever after for them, presumably. What happens to the queen tends to vary from story to story. Sometimes, primarily in cases where the king returns, she ends up being proven to be a witch or an ogre in disguise or whatever and is killed. Sometimes she discovers that Snow is still alive and tears herself apart in a jealous rage. Sometimes she makes one final attempt to destroy Snow and gets destroyed instead. Sometimes you never find out what happened to her at all, and Snow just ends up in a different kingdom entirely, so presumably the queen was just happy as can be and went on living her life primping in front of a mirror till she got a bad tooth or the plague or whatever and died. In any version, they tend to be pretty light on messages and morals, with the overarching theme being a very simple and always applicable be kind to others. Nothing extravagant, nothing specific to a particular situation, just be kind and maybe don't take things from strangers. Something that everybody should aspire to, regardless of lifestyle, class, race, or any other trait they may have. Not so anymore. Now it seems like pretty much everything that comes out has a laundry list of statements that they have to beat you over the head with until your concussion stops you from being able to do anything else but chant whatever they've decided is the big important message over and over. No nuance, no subtlety, no differing viewpoints. Just pure black and white. You either agree with us entirely or you are the absolute scum of the earth. While most large studios are still too afraid to go after subject matter relating to gay or trans people and their rights, as evidenced by Disney only showing characters in same sex relationships in small background clips that can easily be edited out for their Chinese releases, and only giving tiny hints that any character might be trans, one thing that none of them seem to be afraid of hammering in as much as possible is the idea of girl power. This isn't exactly a new thing. We've had girl power episodes, shows, and movies since probably back in the 60s and 70s when the romantic ideals of the typical 50s nuclear family were starting to become stale and the younger generation were wanting more. I guess Disney just didn't get the memo that the whole strong independent woman thing is old news, and drawing attention to it just drags things backwards again by convincing people it's still an ongoing battle and they have to pick a side as loudly as possible and draw attention to it at every opportunity.
It all comes down to this one penalty kick. Can the young woman break the glass ceiling and prove once and for all that a female can be just as good an athlete as a male?
You know, Amy, anytime someone calls attention to the breaking of gender rules, it ultimately undermines the concept of gender equality by implying that this is an exception and not the status quo. What? Just because I'm a meathead doesn't mean I'm not a feminist.
Yes, I know there are some idiots out there who still think women belong in the kitchen and shouldn't be allowed to have their own choices, but they were by and large disappearing until more recent events started polarizing things and bringing it to the forefront of arguments again, using protecting women as an excuse to harm a lot of people, including women and children who maybe don't fit the perfect mold of their ideals. And the whole trad wife thing got started, and even some women started saying that women should have to live the way they think is right, because that's how they want to live. So they think everyone else should just agree with it, and even if they don't, be forced into it by default. Of course, the version of traditional they practice is all for show, and they very much do not practice what they preach. And it's a kind of lifestyle that people can't realistically have unless they're being financed by a partner with a lot of money. So even if other people did want to live that way, chances are they simply can't. Now, I am, in many ways, as old-fashioned as it gets. I learned to cook and clean as a kid and was raised in environments that largely pushed a religious ideal of women in the kitchen, men in the fields kind of lifestyles. As complicated as my own relationship with gender is, as mentioned in my thoughts video a while back, For the most part, at this point in my life, I'm comfortable with my identity as a woman and how many traditionally feminine things I enjoy. I like sewing. I like long, swooshy skirts and pretty dresses. I like cooking and canning and gardening. I like making cute aprons with honeybees on them. My ideal lifestyle, something I'm still trying to find a way to reach, would just be living quietly on a piece of land I own with a big garden, maybe enough space for a horse or mule, chickens are a must, and maybe enough room to have a dairy cow or two and maybe raise a beef calf each year, with a house that has a decently sized kitchen and a good cellar and just live a quiet life. I don't need or want a big mansion or a penthouse apartment overlooking a big city or any of that. However, I also tend to not fit a lot of ideals of traditional femininity for many reasons, physical and personality wise, and that's okay. I'm constantly getting surprised comments from people about how strong I am because I work in agriculture and spend a lot of time outdoors doing manual labor. I've raised and taken part in butchering livestock for consumption, and I'm capable of putting an animal down myself if it needs to get done. I don't have children or a partner, and I have no desire whatsoever to have one, really. I like living alone and knowing that if I put some green tea ice mochis in the freezer, they're still going to be there when I decide I want one. And being able to decorate how I want without anyone else telling me they think the painting with the horses is tacky or that I have too many stuffed animals. Because of some hormone nonsense I have going on, I can grow a straight up beard if I want to. I don't, but the possibility is there. No one fits perfectly into any set of gender ideals, and no one should be expected to. This was a pretty widely accepted ideal for a long time, except by a few fringe groups that most people rightfully labeled as extremists to be avoided and mocked. But it seems like more recently, the efforts to demonize one set of people, namely the trans community, has turned that on its head, and now suddenly women are simultaneously strong and independent and capable of handling themselves, while also being frail and delicate and needing to be protected from the terrible people trying to invade their sacred spaces because they're just so weak and helpless. I've had, I've got my own takes on the whole trans women in places exclusively designed for women's safety issues, but that's for another time. It seems like in order to demonize this one incredibly small set of people who weren't really ever on the radar to begin with until some politicians decided to make them a polarizing tool for their campaigns, much like how abortion was a generally accepted and not really thought much of issue until the same happened to it, the idea that women can basically handle themselves and are capable beings got shoved to the side in order to make them hapless victims again who needed to be protected. For a long time, women's rights focused on equality. The main goals were for women to be allowed to do the same things men did, like voting, owning land, having their own bank accounts, and things like that. Things that made life independent possible for women who didn't marry or who were widowed or divorced or otherwise had to provide for themselves. This had been the main focus for a long time, and to an extent, it still is, with pay gaps and hiring practices being two of the main talking points of modern day feminism. However, the most recent wave of feminism doesn't seem to be so much about equality as it does putting women on a pedestal and kicking men down. I can already hear the clacking of keyboard warriors intent on claiming me as a pick me, and honey, I've been called that plenty of times, and I can assure you I'm not trying to get picked by anyone. I'm not interested in a relationship with anyone of any gender. Romance and marriage are not on my radar in the slightest. As much as I may enjoy reading and writing romance stories, I keep them safely to fantasy and I'm not interested in reality. So there's that. Sorry to disappoint. We've had a lot of examples of this in recent media, epitomized in shows like She Hulk, where the main character basically does all of the things that a male villain would do: talking down to people, treating them like they're lesser, using physical intimidation and abuse to get their way, relying on superior strength to force others to do what they want. But it's okay, because it's a woman doing it to men, and sometimes other women. So that makes it progressive and cool, right? I've said it before, and I'll say it again. A bully is a bully, regardless of whatever traits they have that may make them part of a marginalized group. I don't care if they're women, if they're trans, if they're black or gay or disabled or whatever else. If someone is harming and abusing other people around them, they are a bad person and should be treated as such, period. In the case of Snow White, not only is Snow, who is now named after being born in a snowstorm rather than her fair skin, because race swapping characters in established beloved stories rather than making new stories that could be centered around that race and culture in exciting and beautiful ways, not only is she designed to be insufferably bossy and demanding, but it's okay because she's girl bossy. They've also removed almost all agency and importance from all the male characters in the movie and made them pretty unlikable as well. In the original Disney film, Snow White's appeal wasn't just her physical beauty, it was her kind and gentle heart, her innocence, her love that she shared freely with others. She worked hard and shared kindness with everyone around her. She could be firm when she needed to be, like when teaching the dwarves to wash up properly before eating, but she was never a jerk about it. She didn't invade someone else's house and start demanding that they make it suit her like Ziegler did. She cooked and cleaned in exchange for being allowed to stay there to show her thanks. The dwarves pretty obviously knew they should have been washing up all along, but if my ex's teenage nephew taught me anything, it's that some guys just have an aversion to washing their hands for some reason and need some gentle reminders to do so until it becomes habit. She wasn't demanding or rude, she just pointed out how grimy their hands were and told them that they needed to clean up before getting food because it could get them sick otherwise. Real basic stuff that showed her in a mature, more motherly light, which wasn't ideal for women at the time. The dwarfs come to love her and the light she brings to their lives. Not only the good food and having a cleaner, more comfortable home to enjoy after their long days of working, but also the music and fun they have together. They become, in many ways, a family. Even the stoic Grumpy softening and coming to care about her. When they find the Wicked Queen has killed her, they chase her down to her karmic, somewhat self-inflicted death, not because it's their job or to show how strong and brutal they are, but because someone they love was hurt. That's also why they give her such an ornate casket, and why they're so joyful when the prince is able to revive her, even if it means he takes her away to the castle where they may not see her as much. Her safety and happiness means more to them than anything else. Their relationship, a very platonic one, is built on giving and kindness, not on any kind of desire or demands. She was also longing for romance, which was a very basic principle in pretty much all fairy tales and stories at the time. Romance has been a central theme of storytelling basically forever. For most people, finding that special someone to share your life with is the greatest joy you can have. This obviously isn't true for everyone, as there are plenty of people out there who are perfectly happy without romantic relationships, myself included, and looking forward to my Granny Weatherwax days. But romance has been a strong theme throughout media through basically all time, and runs through nearly all fairy tales, even if the main story isn't centered on the romance itself and it's more of just something that happens incidentally. In the original movie, the romance isn't all that focused on. Snow sings about wanting it, she has a scene with the prince demonstrating that they're attracted to each other, and there's the happy ending, but most of the movie isn't about the romance. It's about her creating a found family with the dwarves through her kindness and perseverance. In the god awful remake, they don't want Snow to be kind and gentle and soft because, well, women who display those traits in modern media are generally treated like garbage and talked down to by everyone around them as old fashioned, stupid, worthless, or pathetic. They're either a kind of antagonist who is too stuck in the ways of the past and tries to hold the modern, independent heroes back, even if they're doing so out of concern born of love, or they're just a sad side character who is supposed to be a cautionary tale. Instead, she's supposed to be a girl boss. Someone who isn't interested in romance, but in becoming a leader, though she displays absolutely no skills related to being one. Telling people to just go do a thing doesn't make you a leader. Leadership relies on not only being able to figure out what skills someone has and how to best utilize those skills for the benefit of everyone, but of making sure that the people following you are comfortable and happy and are getting what they need. Balancing input and output, keeping everyone on the same page, and helping everyone to be their best selves is what a leader needs to do, not just bossing people around and acting like a spoiled brat. The prince is also not a prince, because you can't have him possibly hold rank over her or be in a position of power that could be her equal. He needs to be clearly beneath her. Instead, he is a thief who leads a group of bandits out in the woods. These bandits are made up of the characters who were going to be the dwarves originally, the magical creatures, since Peter Dinklage is a ladder pulling prick who decided to make it impossible for any little person but himself to get jobs in acting by claiming it was discrimination. Although he's more than happy to take that big multi-million-dollar contract playing a dwarf. Seriously, this guy sucks. He got his, so screw everyone else. The dwarves, no longer called dwarves, are now fully CGI, and for a company as massive and powerful as Disney, these things look awful. Dragonheart, a much lower budget movie that came out a long time ago, looked 1,000 times better than this and still holds up fairly well today. This is brand new and already looks awful. Of course, the rush to get it done probably had a lot to do with that, since the movie was originally shot without them in it at all, until test audiences absolutely gutted it and expressed how much they hated the movie as it was, so Disney tried to scramble and patch it up as much as they could, obviously without success. Ziegler's Snow White isn't likable in any way. She is supposedly kind, but it's very selective. Sure, she gives the hot thief some food and talks to the queen about people being hungry, but then she goes bossing people around and acting like a demanding idiot. I mean, she's so stupid that it takes someone outright telling her that Thief Boy taking a bullet, well, an arrow, for her means that he likes her, for her to realize that Thief Guy is interested in her romantically. Ziegler is just not likable in general. Even if you weren't familiar with what a nightmare she is on social media, interviews, and basically anywhere else she's stuck her nose, her acting in the movie is so wooden, awkward, and just soulless. One of the reasons that some people like live action over animation is that sometimes in animation it can be hard to get across the subtle expressions that human faces are capable of. Humans can see tiny shifts in each other's body language and facial cues that can convey a lot of information, consciously or subconsciously. And a good actor knows how to take advantage of being able to express and exaggerate their expressions, especially for comedic effect. For a great example of this, look at Lottie from Princess and the Frog. A lot of the time in animation, especially when animating women, the companies tend to keep their expressions a lot more subtle and less expressive because they're trying to make sure they're always attractive. Miguel and Tulio from Road to El Dorado suffered from this. They had a lot more room for wild expressions, but the animators seemed more worried about making sure they always looked handsome. Lottie is beautiful, but also gets some hilariously exaggerated expressions and body language that make it clear she's a wildly passionate person with a great sense of humor who would just be so much fun to hang out with. And it makes her incredibly likable, even if she's a spoiled rich girl who always gets what she wants. Of course, there's a lot more about her that makes her a fantastic character, but that's for another time. The acting in the Snow White remake is just awful, from the CGI and human characters alike. It's stiff, it's wooden, and the only expressions they make, especially from Ziegler, don't convey anything except that someone is standing off camera waving a paycheck around at them and reminding them that they have to finish shooting. I mean, this doesn't look like an expression of someone relieved they're not about to die. This looks like the kind of face someone makes when mocking another person for saying something stupid. Which sums up the movie, really. I won't go into the whole political beef between the two lead actresses, although I will say genocide isn't acceptable no matter who is doing it. But Ziegler made it clear that she is incapable of tact, self-filtering, or just being quiet. Not only did she alienate a large part of the potential audience with her political statements, but she absolutely tore apart the original movie and insulted it, the story, and the people who liked it constantly. Basically, insulting everyone who might have wanted to see a story they loved updated or told in a new way by a company who used to treat these stories with respect. The movie is basically Snow White in name only. The messages, story, the charm and wonder of the original, they've all been replaced with mediocrity and hammering in the motif of girl bosses over and over, which I think it's safe to say people are getting sick of, as it's in pretty much everything that has come out for the past 10 years or so. The movie, much like the main actress, basically spends its runtime telling you that if you liked the original movie and its characters, you're a sexist idiot who should be ashamed for breathing. It tries to give Fairest in the Land a new meaning as well. Even they had to acknowledge that Ziegler just isn't as pretty as Godot. But trying to make Fairest in the Land mean the one who is most fair and just in a political sense, not fair as in pale or beautiful, it just doesn't work. If the mirror was judging fairness in a metaphorical sense rather than the physical, the evil queen would have never been chosen. She wouldn't have even been in the running. If the mirror was going by who was the most just and good as the meaning of the phrase, it would have chosen literally anyone else in the kingdom before the evil tyrant of a queen who starved people just for giggles. They botch all their own messages, which is a pretty common occurrence when movies try to be statements rather than entertainment. People don't watch movies to be lectured to. They don't watch TV shows that tell them they're bad people. People watch movies to be entertained, to see new ideas, to experience wonder, to see the skill of storytellers, actors, and musicians. When your entire movie can be replaced with an image of someone shaking their finger at the audience and telling them they suck, you're not going to have people enjoy it or want to see what else you can do. You're going to have audiences annoyed that they wasted their time and money, especially when the movie tells half its potential audience, men and boys, that they're bad and lesser and terrible strictly because of the circumstances of their birth. My point here being, a lot of the movies and media and the most recent wave of feminism have taken it from being about equality and both sides being heard to being about kicking men down instead of both sides lifting each other up. It's become a race to the bottom, and we're all losing. Hopefully, with the box office busts that have been happening with these movies and shows, they'll start waking up and realizing that people want entertainment that's actually entertaining, not spending ridiculous amounts of money so they can have some overpaid brat telling them in an auto-tuned song form that they're stupid peasants with poor taste. Thank you for joining me for another video. I really hope that creators, big and small alike, make their art, no matter what form the media is in, to tell their stories and try to share something beautiful with the world that comes from their hearts, not just running a bunch of catchphrases and political slogans through a blender to get hacked up on the carpet as if it's something to be proud of. Art and storytelling are part of the human experience. It's something we've been doing since the first person figured out how to use a burnt stick to draw on a cave wall. It's something that is unwaveringly human, and no machines will ever be able to replace that. There are important messages to be shared, but if you aren't selective with how you share them and who you use to do so, well, what you're trying to say will likely get drowned out in the process. The world is still in a state of upheaval right now, and I hope everyone is able to stay safe and keep afloat. Please be kind to yourselves and to those around you. Make sure to give your brain a break from all the worrying sometimes so you can just reset and breathe. But do what you can to be safe. Hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.